Hello, Avi. I understand today we're going to talk about Zionism and what the Jewish opposition to Zionism is. Maybe you could give us a few words on that.
Yes, there's a lot of confusion on this basic point, so that's the starting point, I would think. Zionism is the Jewish ideology that considers that the place for the Jewish people to be living is in the state of Israel, and that only the Jewish people should be living in the state of Israel. So there's two problems with that, and that's the reasons why there's a Jewish opposition to Zionism. First of all, Jews are being told that they shouldn't be living in Canada or the United States because they should be living in Israel. And a majority of the Jewish people have rejected that presumption, and in fact there's about 6-7 million Jewish people living outside of the state of Israel, and only about 4 or 5 million who are living inside the state of Israel as citizens. So a majority of the Jewish people have rejected the Zionist notion that they should be living within the state of Israel as its subjects. So the majority of the Jewish people are, by definition, by Zionist definition, non-Zionist, because they are not Zionists. They are not living in the state of Israel. This is simple definition. The reasons why they are not living in the state of Israel is because Jewish people have traditionally sought to live in a cosmopolitan manner. That is, that they look for the most interesting opportunities in the world scene where they can flourish intellectually or economically. And Jewish people have sought to live in Europe over a great part of its history, but since the Holocaust this has been rejected as a primary site of settlement. So now North America is the favorite site, both Canada and the United States. And Jews who live in Canada are Canadians. Surprise. And Jews who live in the United States are Americans. No big surprise. And they want to be Americans, otherwise they wouldn't be living there. And Canadians, Jews who are living in Canada want to be Canadians. And Jews who live in Quebec, want to be Quebecois. So it's a matter of choice. And Jewish people have chosen to live elsewhere other than the state of Israel. And Israel is not favored as a site, for Jewish people because of the problems that Israel has. In addition to the desire of Jews to remain Canadians or to remain Americans and to raise their children in those countries as such, the reason why there is no positive attraction to the state of Israel for many American and Canadian Jews is because Israel cannot resolve its existential presence in the Middle East. Israel was a nation-state founded by the founding ideologue Herzl, who copied basically the paradigm or the model of what a country is from the German philosopher Hegel, who talked about a nation-state in which there would be one nation to be found within one territory that would establish one homogeneous state. And this is the reason why the Jewish people in Germany were excluded eventually, because they were considered to be of a different nation, as did the German Jewish people, who nonetheless consider themselves to be German as well, as do Jewish people who live in the United States consider themselves to be Americans, and Jews who live in Canada consider themselves to be Canadians. In other words, you can have a dual national identity, which is very common amongst Jewish people.
By definition, most of the Jewish people are not Zionists because they don't live in Israel. Yet when I read things like synagogue newsletters or the local newspapers, it always seems that it's taken for granted that everybody has the point of view of the the Israeli government.
Well, this is the way in which they try to convince Jewish people to become Zionist, or to pretend to be Zionists, or to be taxed, actually, by the Zionist movement. The annual sort of fund drive, that's conducted for the United Jewish Appeal, 35% of those funds go to the state of Israel to substitute for the funds that are withdrawn from the social services within the State of Israel for its citizens. They make appeals to the Jewish population elsewhere to help the poor Jewish people of Israel. The reason why they're poor in the first place is because they're not provided with sufficient support, because the money that is available to the governments of Israel are used more so for military purposes than for social services. And so they ask Jewish people elsewhere to subsidize, the lack of social services in Israel. And so they are taxed, as any citizens of Israel is taxed, by the State of Israel. However, unlike citizens of the State of Israel, they are not granted a vote. The majority of the Jewish people don't have a vote, for the governments of Israel. And yet they were told that they have to follow what the governments of Israel are dictating to them when it comes to Jewish politics. And Jewish politics now encompasses about everything, It encompasses a certain position on Iraq, a certain position on Iran, a certain position on everything. So basically what we have is a minority of the Jewish population which are dictating to a majority of the Jewish population. And ordinarily we would call that a dictatorship. And dictatorship, seeks to maintain its control by various means, including, monopoly over the media, monopoly over the Jewish communal institutions like synagogues, and they pretend that everybody, is in agreement with this dictatorship, when in fact we have quite a different, set of opinions. And the polls that have been conducted amongst the American Jewish population, for instance, demonstrate that there is a large majority, about 75%, which are not in agreement with the governments of the State of Israel, because they are in favor of a two-state solution, which the governments of the State of Israel have refused to implement and resist, by various means. For instance, the Oslo agreements stipulated that by 1999 there was supposed to have been established a Palestine state. This was never allowed. The Sector A, which was the central municipalities of the various Palestinian villages and cities in the West Bank, were reoccupied by General Sharon when he was Prime Minister of Israel, even though they were supposed to be allowed to be operated by the Palestinian Authority under the President Arafat at the time, and there was supposed to be a further withdrawal from Sector B and then Sector C, and this would have liberated all of the occupied territories of 1967. However, the Sector C in particular has continually been encroached upon by various colonies, which are called Jewish settlements, even though they are legally speaking Zionist colonies. And now there's 500,000 colonists who are living in the West Bank sector that was occupied in the War of 1967. So there's been a lot of action on the ground that has been implemented contrary to the Oslo agreements, and in contradiction with the views of a majority, 75% of the American Jewish population, and presumably a same percentage of the Canadian Jewish population. So we have many characteristics of what one would call a dictatorial practice and imposition upon the Jewish populations that are living outside of the State of Israel. And this is why there's an increasing, organization of the Jewish opposition to demonstrate and to implement, the true opinions of the Jewish population living elsewhere other than the State of Israel.
Thank you very much.